I didn't make a video talking about the actual Steam release of this game, did I? Wow, that's bad. Alright, well, if you didn't know, Oneiro is out on Steam, and for those new viewers who don't know what this game is, Oneiro is a first-person roguelike game that I've developed over the course of the last couple years. In Oneiro, you traverse through your mental nightmares, your mental labyrinth, which is a congregation of all your fears. This is split up into 4 layers of your labyrinth, and once you get through all those, you've conquered your fears, you've beaten the game. Now, I tried to stay true to the original Rogue game to the degree that nothing is saved between your runs. There is no meta progression in this game like there is in many other roguelikes today, and the only difference between your first run and your 20th run is just what you've learned from playing the game. So you find a bunch of items, a bunch of weapons, you can stack items to increase their effects or to amplify their effects, and at the end of each layer is a boss, which defeating that boss will take you to the next layer. And that's pretty much Oneiro in a nutshell. Alright, so now that that's all out of the way, I'd like to talk about Oneiro 1.1, which is the next update coming out. This update is going to be rather impactful. It polishes and tweaks just about everything in the game, it adds more content, and it fixes several bugs, all of which I'll be skimming over in this video. Starting off the big changes section, this update was meant to focus on one big complaint that I've gotten from the game. And this complaint was that gear felt clunky to use, it didn't feel user-friendly at all. And this is because before you had to always open up the inventory, scroll over to your desired gear, you had to equip it, cancel out of the inventory, and then use it, and then go back to the inventory, equip the other gear you had on before you used the second gear. And if none of that made sense, that's because it doesn't. So the main focus of this update was to make using gear feel better. So in Oneiro 1.1, you'll be able to use your gear directly from the inventory. And this is super helpful for gear such as life potions or antidotes, something that you would only use once, and then you'd equip back to your previous gear. And upon doing this, the game will automatically queue your current gear so that once you're finished using the gear that you use from the menu, it'll switch right back to your previous gear that you had equipped. I'm also making it possible to use gear from ladders in this version. Doing so will slow your climbing speed by 50%, though it is nice to have the option to use gear on a ladder because sometimes you'll be in a tight situation where you need to use gear to get out of it alive. And this is incredibly helpful if you come across spike traps in a weapon chamber. Since then, you'll be able to use a throwing knife to trigger the spike trap ahead of you. Another big change is the fact that you'll be able to discard gear straight from your inventory. This is to discard gear such as dice that you don't want to take the chance of using and then it backfiring on you just to pick up another new gear. You can't drop items though, that are still locked onto your character once you pick them up. And for the last bit of trying to make gear user-friendly, there will be a dedicated control binding to cycle through your gear. And this makes the game feel so much smoother when you cycle through your gear instead of having to pause the game and go through your inventory to equip something. It's just a quick way to cycle through your gear. Now, in version 1.1, I did add a couple new gear and an item. So the first gear I added is called Contained Energy. This drops from the imps in the second layer, and this forces the player to teleport somewhere random. Not much more to say about this, it's rather straightforward. And it is possible to use this to escape the Minotaur arena, you know, if you're feeling like a coward, which personally I do a lot of the time, but I think we should really just ignore that bit. Anyhow, there's another new gear called the Branch, and this drops from the Nature Giants in Layer 2. The Branch mimics the counterattack from the Nature Giant, in which it just kind of shoots out 6-7-ish roots ahead of the player. Each of them deals 20 damage each, and this is probably the closest thing that Oneiro is going to get to a shotgun. It's incredibly powerful up close, and it's just great for extra damage. So enjoy it. Now on to the item that I've added. This item will look familiar to those who have been around for the game's development for a while, and this is the Rabbit's Foot. This item used to be in the game before the Steam release, and it used to increase your luck by 5 or 10%, one of those. Though, as the release date was coming closer, I realized it felt way too similar to the Emerald Ring to be classified as its own item. So I've changed it up, and I'm adding it into 1.1 here. Rabbit's Foot now acts kind of similar to the Shadow Essence, though instead of activating on every enemy kill, it activates on every critical hit, and instead of increasing your attack, it increases your random base stat by 1%. This goes for your health, attack, defense, luck, speed. It can increase any of those by 1%, and if you get more Rabbit's Feet, then each of those critical hits can increase any one of those stats by 2% or 3%. This is an incredibly good item if you have some luck on your side, and if you're duplicating some Emerald Rings alongside with them. It's an overall really fun item, so even if it is a little bit overpowered, then I'll keep it overpowered to the next patch. Screw it. Now, on top of all this, I did add some new chunks for the generation to generate. For the labyrinth to generate. New chunks, new patterns. Now, I haven't really talked too much about how the game actually generates the labyrinth, that's for another video. But as you're playing Oneiro, you'll come across some parts of the labyrinth that don't really look randomly generated. And these are certain chunks that I've coded to kind of give the labyrinth more shape. Some examples of this would be the bridge, which doesn't have any walls or ceilings. There's one of them that's like a landless hallway where there's no land, and there's one that's like a figure eight. There's about 20 of these, and not every layer can spawn the same ones. So in 1.1, I'm adding a few more. The first one I'm adding, I'm calling hopscotch, which is just 3 pieces of land, you skip a gap, 3 pieces of land, skip a gap, 3 pieces of land, skip a gap, 3 pieces of land. There's some enemies scattered on here and a few treasures, and it opens up at the left and right side of the last section of the land. And the second chunk that I've added is just something I'm calling arena. This is a very cool pattern in my opinion, and you walk into a small corridor and you have to jump up to the next level. And on that next level is a bunch of enemies, there's some traps, a lot of stuff is going to happen on this level. And at the other end of it, there's a treasure and an opening that leads to more of the labyrinth. Now, the other generation patterns that I've added, or generation chunks, are starting patterns. These patterns are generated around the player at the very start of the labyrinth, at the very center of the labyrinth. And these give shape to the overall labyrinth. Man, at this point, labyrinth doesn't even sound like a word. The first starting pattern is something I'm just going to call magnet. It starts the player off in a small hallway, and it opens up north in 2 different directions, and it opens down south in 2 different directions. In addition to this, there's also a west and an east opening, but these are outside of the hallway. And the other starting chunk, or starting pattern, is something I'm calling horizontal hallway, which is a horizontal hallway. It opens up north, south, east, west, all the directions. And there's just a bunch of corridors in this, and I personally really like how it looks. So for this last big change, I was debating whether I should put it into the polish and tweak section, but it's a pretty big change. So the echo barrier item. It used to deal damage equal to your attack, and I've changed that so now it deals damage equal to your max health. This makes it a lot more unique, and since this change, this is probably one of my favorite items, just for the sheer fact that once you have like 10 of them, you can just kind of sit back and just take damage and just dish out massive amounts, and it just feels really good. It feels great. One of my favorites, really. But, So that's all for the big changes. Let's go on to the next section, which is the polish and tweaks that I've made. Probably the most important polish or tweak that I've made is that the controller support now supports 360-degree movement. This used to be limited to the 8 cardinal directions. The controller support can now move in all 360 degrees, and it feels a lot better. The dice gear will now have a chance to increase your sleep timer, and also have a chance to give you some essence. And as a side note onto this, if you use dice or sleeping medication, something that increases your time or removes your time, then the notification that pops up will explicitly tell you how much was added or removed from the timer. There's another change regarding gear in which any of the gear that gives you temporary buffs, such as the power capsule, or the dice, or the liquid rock, all of these durations have been increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Hopefully this will encourage people to actually use these gear as opposed to just kind of forgetting about them. This change also applies to the Ashes gear, which imbues the player with a certain element for a longer time now. I've added more functionality to the grapple hook, in which it can pull out impaled spears on enemies from a distance, which is just nice for extra damage. It also just looks really cool. The weapon chambers you come across will now have limited traps in them. You won't be able to come across 2 or 3 spike traps within a single chamber, and the centerpiece cannot become a pitfall unless you're in the 2nd and 3rd layer. And that's all for the major polish and tweaks, so let's go on to the bug fixes here. I've made sure to fix a couple of the attacks that couldn't be countered, such as the Mimic Bomb. I've also fixed a bug regarding spike traps not being able to hit the same enemy twice. And I fixed a very funny bug that's actually been in the game since the Steam release, and that bug you could just use throwing knives, and they'd act exactly like grapple hooks if they hit an item. Which was very, very funny looking, honestly. This is obviously unintended behavior, and I fixed it in this version. Those are probably the most important bug fixes that I've addressed. There's a ton more, but I don't want to go over all of them because none of them are really exciting. There is one more section regarding menus and UI. So for the UI in the labyrinth, I've made the inventory screen not pop up so drastically anymore. It doesn't just pop into existence, it instead slides in from the bottom right, and it has a nice little dim background to it. It looks a lot better than it did before, and it's just a good change overall. The other change I made in regards to the Labyrinth UI, if you had minimal HUD toggled, then the item notification that pops up or the gear notification, it won't take up as much of the screen. It'll just all be condensed, it'll tell you what the item was and how much you own of it. This is meant for the experienced players and to just not clutter up the screen as much. The last couple UI changes I've done have been with the title menu. The biggest change with this is the fact that if you have a game in progress, if you have a story in progress, then the play button won't actually be a play button, it'll be a play island and a play dream button. Play island will take you directly to the island if you want to talk with the NPCs, or play dream button is there if you just want to boot up the game and immediately jump into a dream as soon as possible. And the last major change I want to go over in this video is the fact that the title menu can actually Pac-Man, which is super helpful for all the long menus like options or control bindings. Alright, so as I mentioned before, there is a ton more bug fixes, a ton more changes, and once the update comes out, I'll be writing a Steam announcement with a giant change log detailing every single change. But there is a couple more things I want to go over in this video. For version 1.1, I'm going to try to get Oneiro out on the itch.io store. Doing this will open up the game to a new market, and give me an excuse to promote it once again. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that I started throwing together a wiki. I did this because I was kinda, not feeling like working on the game, so instead I did something completely different, but still related to the game. This wiki idea was brought to my attention a long time ago by someone named Mercant, or Mercanty. Haven't really quite figured that guy's name out on my Discord. He started a wiki a long time ago, tried to go back to that page and it was deleted for one reason or another, so I decided to throw in a new one, so shout out to him for coming up with the idea. I've been filling out 1 or 2 pages every time I think about it, and it's gotten about 20 pages by the time I publish this video. And I believe, with all of that said, I think I've addressed everything I wanted to in this video, so if any of this interested you, go check out the Steam page, check out all the links in the description, and thank you so much for sticking around watching this video. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video whenever I get around to making that one. So, see you everybody.